The polished marble floors of the family courthouse felt colder than the January air outside, seeping through the worn soles of Ariana Sterling's only decent pair of shoes. Across the room, her husband, Richard, sat with his lawyer, looking every bit the titan of finance he was. Impeccable suit, confident smile, and the faint, expensive scent of cologne that now made her stomach turn. Beside him sat Isabella, the other woman, her hand resting proprietorially on Richard's arm, a diamond bracelet glittering on her wrist. They were a portrait of success. And Ariana? She was the inconvenient, messy past they were trying to erase. They thought this was a simple procedure, a formality to discard a used-up wife. They had no idea that the truth, a secret buried so deep even she had only just unearthed it, was about to detonate in this very room. For 17 years, Ariana's life had been a symphony composed by Richard. He was the conductor, and she the first violin, a role she once cherished. She had been Ariana Vance, a promising painter whose canvases buzzed with color and life. Then she met Richard Sterling, a charismatic junior analyst with eyes that saw a future he was determined to build. He didn't just love her. He loved the idea of her, the talented, beautiful artist who would complete his perfect life. "We'll be a team," he had whispered to her in the cramped, paint-splattered studio she rented downtown. "You'll inspire, I'll provide. You'll never have to worry about a thing." And for a while, it was true. He provided. A beautiful home in the suburbs, a luxury car, a life free from financial worry. In return, the paintbrushes gathered dust, the canvases remained blank. Her new art became hosting flawless dinner parties for his clients, managing their home with quiet efficiency, and raising their daughter, Lyra, into a bright, kind-hearted teenager. Her world shrank to the size of Richard's ambition, and she convinced herself it was a fair trade. Love, after all, required sacrifice. The first crack in the facade appeared not with a bang, but a whisper. A late-night text he tried to hide. An unexplained weekend business trip. A new cloying perfume on his shirts. Then came Isabella Croft, a junior VP at his firm, 20 years his junior, with a razor-sharp mind and an ambition that mirrored Richard's own. The day he told her was brutally clinical. They were in the kitchen, a cavernous space of granite and stainless steel, where Ariana had prepared thousands of meals. "It's not working anymore, Ariana," he said, not meeting her eyes, his focus on stirring his coffee. "Isabella and I, we have a connection, a meeting of minds. We're having a child." The word struck her with the force of a physical blow. A child, the one thing they had tried for and failed to have after Lyra. The doctors had told her it was unlikely she could conceive again. Richard had feigned disappointment, but seemed quietly relieved, his focus already shifting towards global markets and stock portfolios. "So you throw us away?" she had asked, her voice a raw, broken thing. "Me and Lyra. 17 years for a meeting of minds?" "Don't be dramatic," he'd scoffed, finally looking at her. His eyes, once full of admiration, were now cold with disdain. He saw her not as his wife, but as an obstacle. "I'll be generous. You can have the condo downtown. I'll provide a stipend. But Lyra stays with me. Isabella will be a wonderful stepmother, and the baby needs a stable two-parent home. You're fragile, Ariana. Unstable. The court will see that." That was his strategy, to paint her as a neurotic, emotionally frail woman incapable of caring for her own child. His legal team sent a flood of paperwork, a deluge of accusations designed to drown her. They claimed her abandoned art career was proof of her flightiness. They twisted her grief into hysteria. They used her lack of a recent career to label her as dependent and without prospects. Ariana felt herself disappearing. The woman she once was, the vibrant artist, was a ghost. The wife and mother she had become was being systematically dismantled by legal jargon. She sold her jewelry to afford a lawyer, a man who looked at her with pity and advised her to settle. "He has the best firm in the city, Mrs. Sterling," the lawyer, Mr. Gable, had said, sighing. "They will bury you. Take the settlement. You won't get custody of your daughter. But you'll have visitation." Visitation. The word was a knife. To be a visitor in her own daughter's life. That night, packing some of Lyra's old baby clothes into a box, a wave of pure, unadulterated rage washed over her. It was a feeling so foreign and so powerful it burned away the fog of despair. This wasn't just about a house or money. This was about her identity, her motherhood, her entire life's work. Richard wasn't just leaving her. He was trying to erase her. He had composed their life, and now he was trying to write her out of the final movement. She picked up the phone, her hand shaking not with fear, but with a newfound, terrifying resolve. She fired Mr. Gable. She had one last desperate idea, a name given to her by a friend from a women's shelter she had once volunteered at. A lawyer who supposedly took on impossible cases. A woman named Sarah Jenkins. As she drove to a small, unassuming office in a less glamorous part of town, Ariana clutched the steering wheel. Richard and Isabella saw a poor, broken wife stumbling into court. They were about to learn that nothing is more dangerous than a woman who has already lost everything. Sarah Jenkins's office was the antithesis of the one Richard's lawyers occupied. There were no panoramic city views, no mahogany desks, no army of paralegals in crisp suits. Instead, the small second-floor walk-up smelled of old books, brewing coffee, and relentless determination. The walls were lined not with awards, but with photos of smiling clients, ordinary people who had been chewed up by the system and whom Sarah had helped piece back together. Sarah herself was a woman in her late 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She listened to Ariana's story without interruption, her gaze steady and unnervingly perceptive. Ariana found herself telling Sarah everything, not just the legal facts, but the emotional truth of her marriage, the slow erosion of her identity, the casual cruelties Richard inflicted, the chilling moment she realized she was no longer a partner, but an accessory he was ready to discard. When she finished, her voice hoarse, she braced herself for the same pitying look Mr. Gable had given her. Instead, Sarah leaned forward, a glint in her eye that was not pity, but fire. "Richard Sterling," Sarah said, her voice calm but laced with steel. "Sterling Financial Group. I know him by reputation. He projects an image of invincibility. Men like that believe their own press. They think the rules don't apply to them. That makes them arrogant. And arrogance," she finished with a thin smile, "makes them sloppy." For the first time in months, Ariana felt a flicker of hope. It was a fragile, unfamiliar feeling. "His lawyers say I'm unstable," Ariana whispered. "They have affidavits from concerned friends, his business partners' wives, saying I seemed withdrawn and depressed." "Of course they do," Sarah countered, standing up and pacing the small office. "It's a classic narcissist's playbook. Gaslight, isolate, and discredit. First, we fight fire with fire. We'll get affidavits of our own, your real friends, your volunteer work, your relationship with Lyra. We will paint a portrait of a devoted mother who sacrificed her own ambitions for her family, only to be betrayed." Sarah's strategy was twofold. The first part was defensive, to counter Richard's narrative and prove Ariana was a stable, loving parent. She had Ariana collect letters from Lyra's teachers, from the parents of Lyra's friends, from the shelter where Ariana volunteered. Each letter was a small brushstroke, repainting the picture of the woman Richard was trying to erase. The second part was offensive. He's claiming financial hardship to lowball your settlement, despite being a multi-millionaire, Sarah said, poring over the financial disclosures Richard's team had sent. These numbers, they're too neat, too perfect. He's hiding assets. I'm going to file for a forensic accountant to go through every transaction he's made in the last 5 years. Ariana's eyes widened. Can we do that? We can and we will, Sarah stated. The court will grant it if we provide reasonable suspicion. And I have more than suspicion. I have a gut feeling. But Sarah's intuition went beyond the finances. There was something about Isabella Croft that bothered her. In the pictures Ariana had shown her, pulled from social media, Isabella was always perfect. Perfectly coiffed, perfectly dressed, her hand always protectively on her burgeoning baby bump. She projected an image of maternal bliss. Tell me about her, Ariana. Everything you know. Not much, Ariana admitted. She's from a wealthy family in Boston, top of her class at Wharton. Richard said she was the sharpest analyst he'd ever seen. He was mentoring her. Mentoring, Sarah said, the word dripping with sarcasm. How long were they together before he told you? I don't know. Months at least, maybe a year. Sarah tapped a pen against her legal pad, her brow furrowed in thought. Something's not right. The timeline. He leaves his wife of 17 years for a woman he's known for a year, who conveniently gets pregnant right as her career is taking off. It's a bit too scripted. That night, Ariana couldn't sleep. Sarah's words echoed in her mind. Arrogance makes them sloppy. She thought about Richard's obsession with control, with crafting the perfect narrative. His life was a series of calculated moves, marrying the beautiful artist, having the perfect daughter, reaching the pinnacle of his career, and now trading in his aging wife for a younger model and a new heir. It was all part of the Richard Sterling brand. But what if there was a variable he hadn't accounted for? Driven by an impulse she didn't understand, Ariana went to her old, dusty art studio in the attic. She pulled out a blank canvas, and for the first time in over a decade, she began to sketch. She didn't sketch a landscape or a still life. She sketched Isabella's face from memory, the confident smile, the ambitious eyes. But as her charcoal moved across the canvas, another face began to emerge from the periphery. A face she had seen in the background of a few photos from a company gala. A young, handsome man, always hovering near Isabella, his expression unreadable. She remembered his name, Daniel Peterson, one of Richard's junior associates, a quiet, ambitious young man Richard often mocked for being all polish and no substance. Ariana stared at the sketch, a cold dread mixing with a wild, improbable idea. It was nothing, a coincidence. But in a life that had been so brutally upended, she was learning to trust the whispers of her own intuition, an instinct she had suppressed for far too long. The next morning, she called Sarah Jenkins. "Sarah," she said, her voice low and urgent, "I think we need to look into Isabella. Not just her finances, her personal life. And I think you should start with a man named Daniel Peterson." Sarah Jenkins believed in evidence, but she also believed in the primal instinct of a woman fighting for her child. Ariana's call about Daniel Peterson was a long shot, a gut feeling based on a half-remembered face. But in a case this lopsided, long shots were all they had. "A private investigator," Sarah said over the phone. "It's expensive, Ariana, and it might turn up nothing." "I don't care," Ariana replied, her voice firm. She had sold a small painting she'd made in college to a collector who had followed her early career. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I have a feeling about this. Richard's blind spot is his own ego. He wouldn't see a threat from someone he considers beneath him. Sarah hired Mark Corrigan, a former detective with a bloodhound's nose for secrets. He was discreet, thorough, and utterly unimpressed by wealth and power. His first task was simple: to build a complete picture of Isabella Croft's life in the months leading up to her relationship with Richard becoming public. Mark's initial report came a week later. On the surface, Isabella was exactly who she claimed to be. Her work schedule was grueling, her social life revolved around corporate events, and her apartment was in a high-security building. She was the model of a focused, career-driven woman. But, Mark said, sliding a folder across Sarah's desk, there are gaps, little windows of time, lunch hours that stretch to 2, evenings where she leaves the office and doesn't go straight home. Nothing concrete, but a pattern. The name Daniel Peterson was a ghost. He and Isabella worked in the same department, but there was no record of unusual interaction, no emails, no project overlaps. Publicly, they were just colleagues. "Keep digging, Mark," Sarah urged. "Be a shadow." Meanwhile, the forensic accountant Sarah had hired, a meticulous woman named Lena, was excavating Richard's financial empire. What she found was a labyrinth of shell corporations, offshore accounts, and undeclared assets. Richard hadn't just hidden a few $1,000s, he had concealed millions. He had systematically undervalued shared assets and created a financial narrative that painted him as a man under considerable strain, all while living a life of obscene luxury. "This is our bombshell for the financial settlement," Lena told Sarah, her eyes alight with professional satisfaction. He lied under oath in his declarations. "This isn't just unethical, it's perjury. The judge will crucify him." This was a major victory, enough to secure Ariana's financial future. But it wouldn't win her custody of Lyra. For that, they needed to dismantle the core of Richard's argument, that he and Isabella offered a more stable home. The breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Mark Corrigan called Sarah with a tone of quiet urgency. "I've got something. Isabella has a weekly appointment she doesn't list on her calendar. A wellness consultation across town. I followed her. It's a high-end prenatal clinic, but she didn't go in the front door. She met someone in the coffee shop next door first. Daniel Peterson." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. What did they do? They talked for 10 minutes. He looked stressed. She looked angry. He handed her an envelope. Then she went to her appointment, and he walked away. "I got you something else." Mark's voice was grim. After he left the coffee shop, he was smoking. He threw the cigarette butt in a public trash can. "I have it. Bagged and tagged." This was it. The thread. A cigarette butt containing Daniel Peterson's DNA. It was circumstantial, but it was more than they'd had before. The problem was, they had no legal way to compel a paternity test for Isabella's unborn child based on such flimsy evidence. A judge would laugh them out of court. "We can't force a test," Sarah mused, pacing her office, "but we can plant a seed of doubt. We can make Richard question it himself." The plan was audacious and risky. It relied entirely on Richard's psychology, his arrogance, his possessiveness, and his deep-seated insecurity. That evening, an anonymous package was delivered by courier to Richard Sterling's office. It was a simple manila envelope with no return address. Inside was a single high-resolution photograph. It was a picture Mark had taken from across the street, showing Isabella and Daniel Peterson sitting together in the coffee shop. Their faces were clear. They were leaning in close, their conversation intense and private. There was nothing explicitly incriminating in the photo, but the intimacy was undeniable. There was no note, no explanation, just the image. Ariana's phone rang late that night. It was Lyra. Her voice was strained. "Mum, Dad is going crazy. He and Isabella are having a huge fight. I've never heard him yell like this. He's screaming about some picture, about who she's been meeting." Ariana's hand tightened on the phone. The trap had been laid. The question was, would Richard's ego allow him to see the truth, or would it force him to double down on the lie? A few days later, Richard's lawyer sent a blistering letter to Sarah Jenkins, accusing her and her client of harassment and intimidation tactics. The letter was full of bluster and threats, but Sarah read between the lines. It was the letter of a man whose client was rattled. Richard was scared. The picture had done its job. It had introduced a crack in his perfect, curated world. "He's spooked," Sarah told Ariana. "Now we wait. He's going to do something rash." They didn't have to wait long. The next filing from Richard's legal team was a request for an emergency hearing. The reason cited was Ariana's increasingly erratic and threatening behavior. He was escalating, trying to regain control. He was walking right into their hands. "The hearing is in 2 weeks, Sarah said, a grim smile on her face. "And I have the lab results from that cigarette butt. Daniel Peterson's DNA is on file. Now all we need is a way to get Isabella's baby's DNA before a judge. And I think I know how." The air in family courtroom 3B was thick with tension and the low hum of fluorescent lights. Ariana sat beside Sarah Jenkins, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She wore a simple navy blue dress she'd bought from a consignment shop, a stark contrast to Isabella's designer maternity dress, which was a soft, virginal white. Richard and his lead counsel, a famously aggressive litigator named Julian Davies, were the picture of confidence. They smiled, they conferred in whispers, they radiated an aura of inevitable victory. They had no idea they were walking into an ambush. The hearing began as expected. Julian Davies was a master of character assassination. He called Ariana to the stand and, with surgical precision, began to dismantle her. "Mrs. Sterling," he began, his voice dripping with false sympathy, "is it true that for the past 15 years you have not held any formal employment?" "I was raising my daughter and managing our home," Ariana said, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. "A noble endeavor, of course," Davies purred, "but one that has left you with no marketable skills, correct? No independent means of support?" "My skills are not for the market," Ariana replied. "They were for my family." He moved on, twisting her passion for art into a failed dream, her devotion to her family into a lack of ambition. He brought up her emotional state after Richard left, using words like hysterical and unstable. Through it all, Ariana met his gaze, remembering Sarah's coaching. "Do not let him see you break. You are a mother fighting for her child. There is nothing more stable than that." When it was Sarah's turn to cross-examine, the energy in the room shifted. She didn't start with Ariana's character. She started with the finances. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice crisp and clear as she called a stunned Richard to the stand. He had expected to remain a silent, powerful observer. "I'm holding your sworn financial declaration. In it, you list your total assets at approximately $12 million. Is that correct?" "That's correct," Richard said, adjusting his tie. Sarah then produced a thick binder prepared by the forensic accountant, Lena. "Then can you please explain to the court the purpose of the Sterling Holdings entity registered in the Cayman Islands, an entity with a current balance of $8.7 million, which you seem to have forgotten to declare?" Richard's face went pale. Davies shot to his feet. "Objection? Relevance?" "Your Honor," Sarah said, turning to the judge, a formidable woman named Eleanor Vance. "Mr. Sterling's credibility is absolutely relevant. He is attempting to paint my client as a gold digger while actively committing perjury to hide millions of dollars. It speaks to a pattern of deceit." Judge Vance's eyes narrowed at Richard. "Objection overruled. Mr. Sterling, you will answer the question." For the next hour, Sarah eviscerated Richard on the stand. She exposed shell corporations, hidden accounts, and lavish expenditures he had claimed as business expenses, including the down payment on the luxury apartment he shared with Isabella. Richard, the master of control, was reduced to a stammering, evasive mess. The mask of the confident Titan was slipping, revealing something ugly and panicked underneath. With Richard's credibility in tatters, Sarah turned her attention to the final act. The plaintiff's case rests on the argument that Mr. Sterling and his new partner, Ms. Croft, can provide a more stable and suitable home for the child, Lyra Sterling, Sarah announced, her voice resonating through the silent courtroom. A stability founded on their loving relationship and the impending birth of their child. The defense would like to call Ms. Isabella Croft to the stand. Isabella looked surprised, but she glided to the witness box, the picture of serene motherhood. She answered Sarah's initial questions with practiced ease, describing her deep love for Richard and her excitement to welcome their baby and be a stepmother to Lyra. "Ms. Croft," Sarah said, her tone shifting, "your relationship with Mr. Sterling is the foundation of this new family you wish to build. Can you tell the court when your romantic relationship began?" "About a year ago," Isabella said smoothly. "And you conceived your child approximately 7 months ago." "Yes, that's right." Sarah paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "Ms. Croft, is it not true that at the same time you began your relationship with Mr. Sterling, you were also involved in a close, personal relationship with another colleague at Sterling Financial, Mr. Daniel Peterson?" Isabella's composure flickered, a flash of panic in her eyes. "Daniel, we're colleagues, friends, that's all." Davies stood again. "Objection. This is a fishing expedition, Your Honor." "Where are you going with this, Ms. Jenkins?" Judge Vance asked, her expression stern. "Your Honor," Sarah said, her voice ringing with conviction, "we have evidence that Ms. Croft has been in regular private contact with Mr. Peterson. We also have reason to believe that Mr. Sterling is not the biological father of her unborn child." The courtroom erupted in gasps. Richard shot out of his chair, his face purple with rage. "That is an outrageous lie. This is slander, a desperate, pathetic attempt by a scorned woman." Isabella was paper white, her hand protectively on her stomach. "It's not true. It's a vicious lie." "Then you would have no objection to proving it," Sarah said, playing her final card. "Your Honor, we have on site a certified phlebotomist. A non-invasive prenatal paternity test can be performed with a simple blood draw from the mother and a cheek swab from the alleged fathers. It is quick, painless, and 99.9% accurate. We are petitioning the court to order Ms. Croft, Mr. Sterling, and—" Sarah paused for dramatic effect. "Mr. Daniel Peterson, who I have subpoenaed and who is waiting outside this courtroom, to submit to this test, to settle this matter once and for all." The room fell into a deathly silence. Every eye was on Isabella. Her carefully constructed world was crumbling around her. She looked at Richard, whose face was a mask of fury and dawning horror. She looked at the implacable face of Judge Vance. The trap wasn't just laid, it had been sprung, and Isabella was caught right in the center of it. She had two choices: refuse the test and confirm everyone's suspicions, or take the test and have the truth exposed to the world. Her breath hitched. Her eyes rolled back in her head. With a soft gasp, Isabella Croft fainted, slumping forward in the witness box. Chaos erupted. Court officers rushed to the witness stand as Richard, momentarily forgetting his rage, yelled Isabella's name. Julian Davies was frantically trying to request a recess, his voice drowned out by the shocked murmurs sweeping through the gallery. Ariana sat perfectly still, a silent island in the storm. She watched the scene unfold, not with triumph, but with a profound, aching sadness. This was the wreckage of her life, of 17 years of shared history, laid bare under the cold courtroom lights. She had wanted justice, but she had never wished for a demolition. Judge Vance's voice cut through the noise like a gavel. "Order! Order in this court! Mr. Davies, see to your client. Officers, clear the gallery. We will recess for 30 minutes." In the antechamber, Isabella was revived by paramedics. She was hysterical, sobbing and refusing to look at Richard, who was pacing like a caged animal. His face was a thunderous storm of disbelief, humiliation, and fury. The foundation of his new life, the very reason he had detonated his old one, was built on a lie. The son and heir he had gloated about was, in all likelihood, not his. Sarah and Ariana waited in a small private conference room. Sarah was pragmatic. She fainted to buy time. Davies will be advising her, but her options are limited. Refusing the test is an admission of guilt. Taking it is a confirmation. Ariana simply nodded, staring out the window. He'll never forgive her. He'll never forgive himself, Sarah corrected gently, for being made a fool of. Men like Richard don't care about the betrayal. They care about the public humiliation. He was so sure of his power, so certain that he was the prize, that he never considered she might have a life or secrets of her own. When court resumed, the atmosphere was funereal. The gallery was empty, save for the essential parties. Isabella was not present. Davies informed the court she had been taken to the hospital for observation, citing stress-related complications. Daniel Peterson, a pale, terrified young man in an ill-fitting suit, was brought into the courtroom and sat at the back, looking like he wished the floor would swallow him. Judge Vance addressed the court, her voice devoid of emotion. Given the extraordinary circumstances and Ms. Croft's medical condition, the matter of the paternity test will be addressed at a later date. However, the testimony and evidence presented today regarding the plaintiff's financial disclosures and general credibility are deeply troubling. She looked directly at Richard, her gaze so penetrating it seemed to strip him bare. "Mr. Sterling, this court does not take kindly to being lied to. Your attempts to defraud your wife and mislead this court are a matter of record. Your entire case for sole custody was predicated on the stability you claimed to offer. A stability that now appears to be a complete fabrication." Julian Davies attempted to interject, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. "Miss Jenkins," she said, turning her attention to Sarah, "in light of today's revelations, what is your client's position?" Sarah stood, calm and resolute. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Sterling, has only ever had one goal: to ensure the well-being of her daughter, Lyra. She is not a vindictive woman. However, Mr. Sterling's actions have proven him to be deceitful, emotionally volatile, and unfit to be the primary custodial parent. We are asking for sole physical and legal custody for Mrs. Sterling, immediate repossession of the family home, and a fair and equitable division of assets, the actual assets, not the fraudulent version Mr. Sterling declared." The finality in Sarah's tone was absolute. There was no more room for negotiation. Richard, for the first time, looked truly defeated. The fight had gone out of him. He wasn't a titan anymore. He was just a man, exposed and humiliated, his perfect life a smouldering ruin. The empire he had built, both financially and personally, was based on lies, the ones he told others, and the ones he told himself. Judge Vance looked from Richard's broken form to Ariana's quiet dignity. "The court will take this under advisement," she said. "But I suggest, Mr. Davies, that you and your client prepare to be extremely cooperative. The tide has turned, gentlemen." Walking out of the courthouse, the January air no longer felt cold to Ariana. She felt light. The weight she had been carrying for so long, the weight of inadequacy, of being discarded, had been lifted. She hadn't won by being louder or richer or more ruthless. She had won by holding on to the one thing Richard had tried to take from her, the truth. As they reached the car, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Lyra. "I heard what happened. Are you okay, Mom? I love you." Tears streamed down Ariana's face, but for the first time in a year, they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of relief. The real victory wasn't in the courtroom. It was right here, in this message, her daughter, her truth, her future. It was all still hers. The final hearing was scheduled a month later. It was a subdued affair. The courtroom drama was over, leaving only the grim business of legal resolution. Richard and Isabella had broken up, a messy, public implosion that was now fodder for the city's gossip columns. The results of the paternity test, compelled by court order after Isabella was released from the hospital, were submitted to the judge under seal. They were a mere formality now. Everyone knew the truth. Daniel Peterson had been fired from Sterling Financial Group and had disappeared from public life, a casualty of a war he hadn't intended to start. Isabella, facing ostracization and her own family's disappointment, had moved back to Boston to await the birth of her child. Richard Sterling sat alone with his lawyer. He looked 10 years older. The scandal had rocked his company. Investors were nervous, and the board was demanding answers. The armor of his success had been pierced, and he seemed to be bleeding confidence from the wound. Ariana entered the courtroom, feeling a calm she hadn't known in years. She had spent the last month with Lyra in a small, rented apartment, reconnecting not as a fragile mother and a worried daughter, but as two strong women. She had also started painting again, small watercolors at first, then larger, more ambitious canvases. The colors were returning to her life, literally and figuratively. Judge Eleanor Vance entered the room and all stood. She wasted no time on pleasantries. Her gaze swept over the parties before her, finally resting on Richard. "This has been a deeply unfortunate case," she began, her voice a low, commanding rumble. "It is a case that speaks to the corrosive nature of deceit, not only in our financial affairs, but in our most intimate relationships." She picked up a document. First, the matter of paternity. The court has received the certified results of the non-invasive prenatal paternity test. The results confirm with 99.997% certainty that the biological father of Ms. Croft's unborn child is Mr. Daniel Peterson. Mr. Sterling is conclusively excluded. Even though it was expected, the finality of the words sucked the air out of the room. Richard flinched as if struck. The official, undeniable truth was a public branding of his humiliation. Judge Vance set the paper down. "This fact, while personally devastating for some, is legally relevant only insofar as it completely invalidates the plaintiff's central argument for custody, that he was creating a new, stable, two-parent family unit. It is clear that the foundation of Mr. Sterling's new life was, in fact, a house of cards." She then turned to the financial matters. Her voice became colder, sharper. "Regarding the division of assets, this court has reviewed the findings of the forensic accountant. Mr. Sterling, your deliberate and systematic attempt to hide more than $10 million from your wife and from this court is not just contemptible, it is criminal. I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation into perjury and financial fraud." Julian Davies paled, putting a restraining hand on Richard's arm as he started to rise in protest. "Therefore," the judge continued, her voice rising in authority, "the court orders the following. 1. Sole legal and physical custody of the minor child, Lyra Sterling, is awarded to her mother, Mrs. Ariana Sterling." Ariana gasped, tears welling in her eyes as she reached for Sarah's hand. 2. The family home is to be signed over to Mrs. Sterling, free and clear of any encumbrance, within 30 days. Mr. Sterling will vacate the premises immediately. 3. All concealed assets are to be considered part of the marital estate. Mrs. Sterling is awarded 60% of the total marital assets, valued at approximately $23 million. In light of Mr. Sterling's egregious conduct and financial misconduct, this amounts to a settlement of just under $14 million. A choked sound escaped Richard's throat. He was being systematically dismantled, his life's work carved up and given away. 4, the judge went on, her eyes locking onto his. Mr. Sterling will pay for all of Mrs. Sterling's legal fees. And finally, he will pay child support for Lyra, based on his true income, and he will be responsible for her entire college tuition at a university of her choosing. She put down her papers and removed her glasses, her expression softening almost imperceptibly as she looked at Ariana. "Mrs. Sterling," she said, her voice now quiet and direct, "you have conducted yourself with immense dignity in the face of profound betrayal. You sacrificed your own path for your family, a choice that should be honored, not used as a weapon against you. Your strength is not in question. This court wishes you and your daughter nothing but the best. You are free to go." With a final sharp rap of her gavel, it was over. 17 years of a life, dissolved and remade in a single hour. Ariana walked out of the courtroom, not into the cold January air of her first visit, but into the bright, promising light of a March afternoon. She was no longer Mrs. Richard Sterling, the poor, discarded wife. She was Ariana Vance, the artist. Ariana Sterling, the mother, a woman who had walked through fire and emerged not burned, but forged. 1 year later, the scent of turpentine and oil paint filled the large, sun-drenched attic studio of the house Ariana had once called a cage. Now, it was her sanctuary. Sunlight streamed through the skylights, illuminating a dozen canvases in various stages of completion. They were vibrant, bold, and alive, a riot of color and emotion that told the story of a woman reclaiming her soul. Her solo exhibition, titled Resilience, had opened to rave reviews a month prior. Critics who had once lamented the disappearance of the promising young artist Ariana Vance were now hailing her triumphant return. The centerpiece of the show was a striking, abstract portrait. From a distance, it looked like a storm of chaotic, dark colors. But up close, one could see a single, brilliant thread of gold weaving its way through the darkness, emerging into a burst of light on the other side. She had titled it Courtroom 3B. Lyra, now a high school senior, sat on a stool, sketching in her own notepad. She had her mother's artistic talent and her father's sharp intellect, a combination that made her a force of nature. Their relationship, once strained by the tension of the divorce, was now the anchor of Oriana's life. They were a team. "The gallery called again," Lyra said, not looking up from her drawing. "That collector from Germany wants to buy The Unraveling. He's offering way more than the asking price." Ariana smiled, adding a stroke of deep blue to her current work. Tell them the price is firm. It's not about the money. It truly wasn't. The settlement had provided more financial security than she had ever imagined. But her real wealth was this: the freedom to create, the peace in her own home, and the unwavering love of her daughter. Richard's life had taken a very different trajectory. The DA's investigation had led to a formal indictment for financial fraud. To avoid a trial, he had pleaded guilty to a lesser charge, paying millions in fines and serving 6 months of house arrest. His reputation was shattered. The board of Sterling Financial had forced him to step down as CEO. He was still a rich man, but the power and prestige he had craved his entire life were gone. He was a pariah in the circles he once dominated. He saw Lyra on supervised visits, their conversations stilted and awkward. He was a stranger to his own daughter. Of Isabella, they heard very little. Ariana had received a single, handwritten letter from her a few months after the verdict. It was short and surprisingly devoid of excuses. "I was wrong," it read. "I let ambition and a powerful man blind me. I am sorry for the pain I caused you and your daughter. I hope you find the peace you deserve." Ariana had read it, then tucked it away. She couldn't find it in her heart to forgive Isabella. Not yet, but she no longer carried the anger. It was too heavy a burden for the new life she was building. Sometimes, late at night, when the house was quiet, Ariana would look at her reflection in the dark studio window. The woman staring back at her was different from the one who had walked into the courthouse over a year ago. The fear in her eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. There were new lines on her face, but they were lines of laughter and concentration, not of sorrow. She had once thought Richard was the composer of her life's symphony. She realized now that he had only ever written one part, a somber, restrictive melody. The rest of the score, the entire unwritten canvas of her future, was hers and hers alone to create, and it was going to be a masterpiece. 2 years after the judge's decree, the name Richard Sterling was little more than a ghost in the city's financial district, a cautionary tale whispered among junior analysts. His comeback attempts had failed, his swagger replaced by a quiet desperation that clung to him like cheap cologne. The world he had built, a world that ran on perception and power, had no place for a publicly disgraced king. Ariana, conversely, had never been more present. Her life was no longer an echo of someone else's ambition, but a vibrant sound of her own making. The art world, once a distant dream, was now her reality. Museums were inquiring about acquiring her pieces, and a prestigious New York gallery was hosting a new exhibition of her work. She had found her voice not in spite of her past, but because of it. She had learned to mix pain with pigment, resilience with resin, creating something beautiful and unbreakable from the shards of her broken life. The call came on a crisp autumn afternoon as she was sketching an idea for a new series, her studio filled with the scent of linseed oil and the soft jazz playing from a small speaker. It was Lyra, calling from her dorm at Brown University, where she was studying art history and economics, a perfect fusion of her parents' worlds. "Mum," Lyra's voice was hesitant. "He called me." "Dad." Ariana's hand paused over the paper. She and Lyra had an open line of communication about Richard. Ariana never spoke ill of him, believing Lyra deserved to form her own relationship with her father, however fractured it might be. "Oh? Is everything all right?" "He wants to see me. He's in Providence. He said it was important. He sounded different old." Ariana took a slow breath, looking at the bright, hopeful colors on her palette. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to. You know that." "I know, but I think I should," Lyra said, a new maturity in her voice. "I need to. For me." They met in a sterile coffee shop near campus, a neutral ground of Lyra's choosing. Richard was shockingly diminished. The bespoke suits were gone, replaced by a simple, slightly rumpled sports coat. His face was puffy, his eyes holding a permanent weariness. He clutched his coffee cup like a lifeline. He was awkward, fumbling for words, a stark contrast to the man who once commanded boardrooms with effortless charisma. He asked about her studies, her friends, all the mundane details he'd never had time for before. He was trying, in his own clumsy way, to build a bridge across the chasm he had created. "Your mother," he finally said, staring into his cup. "I see she's doing very well. The magazines, they call her a revelation." "She is," Lyra said simply, offering no more. "I was a fool, Lyra," he whispered, the words seeming to cost him a great deal. "I had everything, a brilliant wife, a wonderful daughter, a perfect life, and I burned it all to the ground for an illusion, for my own stupid pride." He finally looked at her, his eyes pleading. "I just want you to know that. I know I can't fix it, but I needed to say it." Lyra looked at the man before her. She felt a pang of pity, but it was distant, academic. She saw him not as the titan who had terrorized her mother, nor as the father she had once worshipped, but as a deeply flawed man paying the price for his choices. "I'm glad you said it, Dad," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "But an apology doesn't erase the scars. Mum had to rebuild her entire world. I had to watch her do it. You should be proud of her. You have no idea how strong she is." She stood up, leaving her own coffee untouched. "I have to get to class. Take care of yourself." She walked away without looking back, leaving Richard Sterling alone at a small table, a relic of a past no one wanted to remember. A week later, Ariana was surprised by the buzz of her own doorbell. Standing on her porch was Richard. It was the first time he had been back to the house since the judge ordered him to vacate. He looked lost, as if the familiar architecture had become foreign to him. She didn't feel fear or anger. She felt a strange, hollow calm. She opened the door, blocking the entrance. "Richard, what are you doing here?" I saw Lyra," he stammered. "Ariana, I need to say I'm sorry for everything, for what I did to you, to us. I was arrogant. I was cruel. I destroyed the best thing in my life." Ariana listened to the words, the same ones he had likely practiced on Lyra. They were the right words, but they felt hollow, a performance for an audience of one. He was sorry for the consequences, sorry he'd been caught, sorry he had lost. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw the truth. He hadn't come for forgiveness. He had come for absolution to lessen his own burden. "You think you destroyed the best thing in your life," she said, her voice not unkind, but utterly devoid of the emotion he craved. "But you didn't, Richard. You set it free." She stepped aside, gesturing not for him to enter, but for him to see past her into the hallway. From where he stood, he could see straight through to the back of the house, where the doors to her studio were open. Visible on a large easel was a canvas, blazing with the brilliant colors of a sunrise. It was a painting of hope, of new beginnings, of a world he had no part in. "You didn't destroy me," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "You revealed me. You stripped away everything I thought I was, a wife, a hostess, a part of your world, and you forced me to find out who I truly am. I am an artist. I am a mother. I am whole, on my own. The life you burned down was a prison, and I never even knew it." She gave him a small, sad smile. So, thank you. Thank you for setting me free." With that, she gently closed the door, shutting him out for the last time. She walked back through her sunlit home, the echo of their shared past finally silenced. She entered her studio, picked up her brush, and with a steady hand, she began to paint the sky. The story of Ariana Sterling is a powerful reminder that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of finding the light. It's a testament to the quiet strength of a mother's love and the resilience of the human spirit when pushed to its absolute limit. Ariana's journey from a forgotten wife to a celebrated artist shows that our identities are not defined by who we are to others, but by the courage we find within ourselves to reclaim our own narrative. True justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about rebuilding a more beautiful life on the ashes of the old one. If this story of resilience and ultimate vindication moved you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who might need a reminder of their own inner strength. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true-life dramatic stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Thank you for listening.